Hey, good morning and welcome to the broadcast today. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much for the encouragement you've been giving me. Some of your emails and personal messages have really done me good, really edified me, and I hope my answers to some of your questions have been helpful as well. Today I want to begin with this story. There was a woman named Elizabeth Morris from a small Kentucky town who 2 days before Christmas in 1982 was sitting up one night waiting for her son Ted to come home from his job at the mall. He was a college student, but had come home and was working a temp job over a Christmas break to make some extra money for school. And he was late. And at 10:40 p.m. that evening, Elizabeth got the telephone call that every parent fears and dreads. The person on the other end of the line said, "Mrs. Morris, this is the hospital, and I'm sorry to tell you, your son has been killed in an accident." It seems that a 24-year-old man named Tommy Pagazzi had been driving drunk. His blood level actually was 3 times the legal limit, and he had crossed the highway center line and smashed head-on into Ted's car. The drunk driver was only slightly injured, as is usually the case, but 18-year-old Ted Morris was dead. Elizabeth and her husband, as you can imagine, her and Frank were devastated. Ted was their only child, and their anger only escalated when at the trial, their son's killer, Tommy Pagazzi, was only given probation. Elizabeth says that that day after day, she would replay the mental videotape of that night like a horror movie. She wanted revenge. She would fantasize about driving down the road and seeing Tommy walking and driving him into a tree and then watching him die in slow agony. She actually spent a lot of her time trying to track Tommy, hoping she could catch him violating his probation so he would be sent back to prison. There was only one problem with that way of thinking. And I will tell you what the problem was and the rest of that story at the end of this sermon, okay? Now, we are in a series called Love Handles, Getting a Grip on Relationships, and it is based on Paul's writings in 1 Corinthians 13, which is fittingly dubbed the love chapter of the Bible. Let me read a few verses to refresh your memory, and then we'll jump in here. Beginning in verse 3, Paul says this: "Love is patient, and love is kind. Love is not envious. Love does not brag and is not puffed up. It is not rude or unbecoming, nor is love easily angered or resentful. Love keeps no record of wrongs." Now, so far we've looked at 4 of these virtues, 2 of them the first week, patience and kindness. Last week we talked about love is never arrogant or jealous. And today let's think about 2 more of these virtues that Paul mentions here. All right? The first one is this we're going to deal with today. Love has good manners. Say that with me, good manners. Because that's the literal meaning of Paul's phrase in verse 5, love is not rude or unbecoming. Now, I noticed recently that instead of canceling our state fair in Tampa this year, they just postponed it to April because of COVID, which makes me very happy because Nancy and I love to take a day off and go to that fair. We have a lot of fun there. And one of the reasons why, for me at least, besides the food and the exhibits, is I get to watch the racing pigs. Have you ever seen them? I mean, they're great. If you ever get a chance, you need to see these little guys go. Because, listen, it's just hard not to love a little pig, isn't it? Unless you have one sitting in a booth across from you at a restaurant. How many of you know where I'm going here? And this guy that I'm talking about was a guy that I knew. And he was just slopping his food down, basically, talking with his mouth full, mayo at the corner of both lips, chewing that smacking sound, that comes from eating with your mouth open. And then he leans back and tries to be indiscreet, but he belches, and we all heard it. Well, that did it for me. So I lay my fork down, start sliding out of the booth, because I'm going to go say something to him. Something that probably would not have been very pastoral, if you know what I mean. And as I was sliding out, my wife Nancy looked at me and said, "Leave it, leave it." Which is the command we use for our dog around here when she's about to get into something she shouldn't. I wasn't sure how to take that at the time, you know. But I obeyed her like the good little puppy that I am, I guess, and didn't do it. Anyway, when something like that happens, it reminds you right away why your mom used to always say, don't slurp your soup, keep your mouth closed when you chew, right? It wasn't so much about our health or our digestion or keeping our clothes clean. It was about not being rude. It was about being considerate. It was frankly about having good manners, was it not? Because good manners are those little things we do for others that say, hey, you matter, you're significant, you're worthy of my respect. Well, now some people are going to say, and some of you probably already have said, this doesn't interest me because I don't really have a problem with this. I'm not really a rude person and I think my manners are good. And I'm sure most of us would respond that way. I know that I would. However, being rude or lacking good manners can manifest in very subtle ways. It sort of sneaks up on you without you realizing it. So let me offer you a couple of tips in this area, just in case it ever happens for you. The first tip I would give you is this. Always, and I'm talking about to people that you love and have relationship with. When you are interacting with them, always ask questions instead of making statements. Because people respond so much better that way. For instance, it's quite easy for spouses or parents even to get into the you need mode. Do you know what that is? You need to pay attention. You need to do better at that. You need to do this. You need to do that. Does that sound familiar? If so, how about changing those emotionally charged statements into something like this? Listen, honey, how about we try this? Hey, could I help you do that? Instead of, we need to talk, maybe try, honey, could we talk about something? Does this make sense? So start asking questions rather than always making statements. So it's a good start. And then secondly, always say please and thank you. And I know that sounds so childish, so puerile. I get that. Because those are some of the first words we are taught as toddlers and that we teach our children, aren't they? But watch this. As adults, especially adults in a love relationship, these words can easily disappear or at least become neglected. Think about it. When you first enter into a relationship, you're on good behavior, right, with that person? You open the door. You'll open the door for her. You hold hands. It's all about please and thank you and compliments and special surprises and a you first type of thing. Do you remember those days? In other words, no rudeness. Always good manners. However, and sadly, after a bit, we begin taking each other more for granted. And those good manners and the pleases and the thank yous seem to just disappear, fall by the wayside. But listen, you would be amazed at how relationships flourish and are enlivened when those words are incorporated back into the mix. I tell you, your partner and other people will respond to this. Thank you, Nancy. John, will you please help me with this? Those kinds of things. And I'll tell you what will happen in a relationship. You begin saying please and thank you to each other regularly, and before long you'll start hearing things like, why, you're welcome, or may I, or here, let me. And the next thing you know, you'll be bringing flowers home, and he or she will be ironing your clothes again, and both of you will be going to bed together lots earlier. Wink, wink. You know what I mean? I think you get the picture. So, love displays good manners. Secondly, Paul says here, love is not angry. Verse 5 says, love is not easily angered. And that means love is not a hothead. How many have no problem with this area? So we could just cruise right past it, right? Just move on? Yeah, me too. And by the way, it's not that we will never be angry. It is that when anger does rise up, we will handle the anger appropriately. That's what Paul's talking about. So here's the question that we should ask. How do we handle anger? How do you handle anger? Do you identify mostly with Thomas Jefferson or Mark Twain? Jefferson said, when you're angry, count to 10. If you're very angry, count to 100. That's pretty good advice, right? On the other hand, Mark Twain said, when you're angry, count to 4. And when you're very angry, swear profusely. Now, which one do you more closely relate to or resemble? And if you're in the room with another person that you love or in a relationship with, be careful to say the right one. I suspect most people identify more closely with Mark Twain, don't you? Especially in this stress-filled COVID environment that we find ourselves. And again here, we are speaking of handling anger, not getting to the point of never experiencing. That's never going to happen. When Paul said love is not easily angered, he used a word that means a sudden outburst, a lashing out. So he is teaching us that love, real love, refuses to lash out or go off on another. It's the notion of learning how to keep from displaying outwardly that which angers us inwardly. Because how many know there is a fine line between experiencing anger and expressing anger, right? Let me follow up with some words from Paul in Ephesians 4. He says there, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. One of the old-time comedians years ago, Phyllis Diller, said, that verse means don't go to bed mad, stay up and fight it out. And maybe that's not that bad advice. She might have been right, at least half right. Don't go to bed angry, that's pretty good advice. But I would offer, instead of fighting it out, maybe work it out. And I mean by that kindly and patiently and lovingly work through it. And if that takes all night, it just takes all night, right? By the way, when Paul says, in your anger, do not sin, he was literally saying, when you get angry, don't let it take you over. Don't let it get the best of you. So you say, well, that's easier said than done. And I'm agreeing 100% with you. Let me give you a few practical ways this can happen for you, that it won't take over when you feel the anger rising up. The first thing I would say, the first tip I'll give you is this. Take responsibility. And I mean for your anger. We have to get to a place to stop blaming other people for our anger, simply because other people don't make us angry. Now I want you to listen to me. We may choose to respond to another with anger, but that's on us, not them, because anger is a choice. Another person doesn't make me angry. I choose to be angry. The good news, though, is that anger is never the only choice we have for dealing with a person or a situation, is it? There is always a more productive option for dealing with our frustrations that lead to anger. Funny story for you. Years ago, I preached on anger being a choice and how we can choose anger or we can choose like another way to respond. So a few days later, I was sitting by the pool on the phone while my daughter was swimming. I was watching her, taking care of her as she swam. And in the conversation I was having on the phone, I said, oh yeah, I know the guy. He makes me so angry sometimes. And my daughter overheard me and turned in the pool and said, Daddy, he doesn't really make you angry. Remember, you are just choosing to be angry. Daddy, you must make better choices. And she paddled off. So then I was mad at my kid, right? So here's what I'm saying. Take responsibility for your anger. It's a choice that we make. And secondly, identify the root cause of your anger. Most of the time, anger is caused by one of three things. Let me give them to you. Number one is hurt. Someone hurt our feelings, so we're wounded. It hurts. A second reason is fear. When something scares us, we tend to respond aggressively. For instance, you may fear the destruction of a relationship or some sort of embarrassment, or you might fear the loss, a loss of some other kind. And when that happens, you will feel threatened, and your response can often be anger. And then a third reason is frustration. Things are just not going the way we expected them to go, that we had hoped they would go, and we get frustrated. And that frustration turns into anger. It's like a man I talked with some time ago who was telling me about how he had planned to leave for a family vacation the previous week. And he was going to leave on a Monday morning at 7 o'clock. And when he went out to load the car for the family, there was a flat tire. And that's frustrating, right? You can imagine. And he went on to tell me how in his frustration, he let anger get the best of him. And to the point where his anger erupted such that everyone felt it. Everyone in the family, from the littlest to his wife, they all felt his anger. And it was such that the first few hours of the trip, no one in the car spoke a word to each other. All that time that they had together as a family was wasted, at least those first few hours. Now, how many of you understand that is not the way to begin a family vacation? So the challenge for us is to stop when we're angry, take a breath, and ask ourselves, am I upset because I feel hurt or afraid or frustrated? Because oftentimes what happens is after we identify the problem accurately, then the anger is diffused, which makes it much easier to work on solving the actual problem to begin with. So, identify why the things that anger you. And then this last one, if this is an issue for you that you struggle with, trust God to set you free. You do what you need to do practically, but then trust God to set you free. You see, the bottom line on anger is that it has to be dealt with as a spiritual problem if one ever hopes to fully conquer it. That means allowing the Holy Spirit within you to heal your hurt and your pain and your frustration. And that, frankly, that will be a process. It won't happen overnight, especially for those with deep-seated hurt and deep-seated pain. But through God's Spirit, it can and will happen as we learn to better trust and rest in Him. One more thing. Look at verse 5 again. I didn't deal with the last part of it intentionally until now. Paul says, love is not rude or unbecoming, nor is love easily angered or resentful. Now watch this. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Quite simply, that means love forgives. And I talked about this at length a few weeks ago, so I won't rehash it all again here, but watch this. It is very difficult to choose to forgive someone, and remember, forgiveness is also a choice. It is very hard to forgive another when you are angry and filled with hatred. Would you agree with that? But so often, they go hand in hand. So, she wanted revenge. She would fantasize about driving down the road, seeing Tommy walking, driving him into a tree, and then watching him die slowly in agony. She actually spent a lot of her time tracking Tommy, hoping she could catch him violating his probation so he could be sent to prison. There was only one problem. Elizabeth was a Christian, and as such, she brought her feelings to God and began praying about all of it. As she did, she was reminded that God Himself had also lost His only Son. And she was reminded how on the cross Jesus had said, Father, forgive them, about the soldiers who had tortured and crucified Him. And she realized that she had to deal with her anger and she had to forgive Tommy. So she did. She just simply made a choice to forgive. And watch this. She didn't feel like forgiving. She didn't feel like making that choice. But even though she didn't feel like doing it, she knew she had to. It had to be done. So she went to Tommy and said, Tommy, I forgive you. Please forgive me for not forgiving you earlier. Isn't that something? Now, if the story ended right there, it would be a very good story, wouldn't it? But check this out. She didn't just forgive him. She and her husband actually began to build a relationship with their son's killer. And after some time, they even helped Tommy Pagazzi find Christ himself. Think about that. Because of their influence, because of their forgiveness, and because of their grace, and because of their not of this world type of love, Tommy decided to follow Jesus. Now, hey, that's how life for a Christian should work. Would you agree? Peter says in 1 Peter 3, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have. Peter is saying this, we are to live in such a way that it forces people to ask questions. Questions like, hey, why are you like this? What is it that allows you to be gracious? Well, how are you able to forgive when you get offended? Why do you love the way you love? And the good news is we get to tell them because we've already shown them through our willingness to release our anger and to forgive. That's what happened to Elizabeth and Frank Morris. Because they were willing to make a choice to lay aside their anger and forgive a person who was not necessarily deserving of that forgiveness. And because they did it at a time when their emotional pain was at its highest, when it was at a crescendo, they were healed of their anger. They were healed of their bitterness and their unforgiving spirit. And health and wholeness was restored to them. And Tommy Pagazzi's life was transformed for all of eternity. Isn't that great? So hey, let's get out there this week and love so good, love so Jesus-like, that we too become life changers. How about that? That's all the time I have today. I thank you for joining me again. I hope this message has been an encouragement to you. Let me know if it has been, will you? Thank you for supporting us. Some of you are supporting us financially now. God bless you for that. We appreciate it so very much. And God willing, we'll have a great week together, a blessed week, a life-changing week, and we'll see you again next time, okay? I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.